The La Riviera gleamed like a temple to indulgence. Chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, throwing fractured light across crystal glasses and polished marble. The air was heavy with the perfume of wealth, truffle oil, imported wines, designer colognes that lingered long after their wearers passed by. Jazz drifted from the corner, notes lazy and expensive, while laughter rang sharp as champagne corks. To the clientele, it was paradise. To Grace Miller, standing stiff in her black vest and white blouse, the narrow tie digging into her throat, it was another prison sentence. 6 hours of smiling until her jaw hurt, pretending she didn't notice when entitled men let their eyes slide down her legs, pretending her aching feet weren't screaming in her sensible black heels. The uniform fit too tightly. The blouse had been washed so often it scratched at her skin. She carried a tray balanced high on one hand, weaving between tables with practiced steps, her voice soft, polite, detached. "Yes, sir. Right away." "Of course, ma'am." No one saw her. Not really. She was part of the furniture, an efficient shadow who delivered plates, refilled glasses, disappeared. And maybe that was safer. Still, every time she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, dark circles under her eyes, hair scraped back in a simple tie, her face drained of color, she thought of Emma, of the daycare bill due tomorrow, of the shoes Emma had outgrown. That thought alone kept her upright. The tray wobbled slightly as she adjusted her grip. A customer snapped his fingers for more wine. She turned, already composing her polite smile, when the front doors swung open. Cold air rushed in, slicing through the heat, and then her chest constricted. "Ethan!" The tray nearly slipped from her hand. Her heart slammed so hard she thought it might rattle the glasses. He stepped inside like he owned the place, the tailored suit sharp on his lean frame, his hair slicked into perfection. She couldn't breathe. He was thinner than she remembered, but the arrogance clung to him like a second skin. The dangerous spark in his eyes hadn't dimmed. It was the same look he wore when he cornered her against the kitchen counter, when his fists pounded the apartment door while Emma screamed in the crib. Her throat closed. For a moment she wasn't Grace Miller, waitress. She was the trapped girl again, the one who had whispered please, stopped to walls that didn't care. Her body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The kitchen was on the far side of the dining room, straight past him. The hostess was already flipping through the reservation book, seconds away from leading him further inside. If he saw her, if he realized she was working here, his smirk would come. That smirk that always said, "You'll never escape me. Not here. Not tonight." She abandoned the tray on a side table and scanned the room with wild eyes. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Cover, escape, anything. Her gaze caught the bar. A group of men sat rigid in their suits, posture too sharp to be casual businessmen. And in the center, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, hands resting on the polished wood. She didn't think. She moved. Weaving through the crowd, she slid onto the stool beside him, uniform marking her as staff, nerves fraying at the edges. She placed her trembling hand over his. The skin was warm, strong. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My ex-husband just walked in. Pretend you know me. Just for a minute." Only then did she look up. His eyes were obsidian, still, deep, reflecting the dim light like a predator waiting to strike. High cheekbones, stubble shadowing a jaw cut with precision, hair dark, streaked faintly with silver at the temples. An accent of power, not age. He didn't speak. He studied her, unhurried, precise. The silence stretched until her lungs ached. Then, finally, his lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "There you are," he said smoothly, his accent velvet soft, unmistakably Italian. Relief nearly buckled her knees. She forced herself to play along. "Sorry to keep you waiting," she murmured, though her voice trembled. He shifted, his broad frame angling to shield her from view. His other hand slid with quiet authority to the small of her back. It wasn't rough. It wasn't gentle either. It was possession and protection tangled into one gesture. "Is that him?" His voice was low, for her alone. Grace followed his gaze. Ethan was still at the front, speaking to the hostess. She nodded quickly, pulse hammering. "Ex-husband," she whispered. A flicker passed through the stranger's eyes. Dark, sharp, dangerous. "Then you don't need to worry," he said simply. At that moment, another man at the bar called out, "Mr. Moretti." The name struck the air like thunder. Grace stiffened. Patrons nearby seemed to shrink in their chairs. The bartender lowered his gaze. Even the hostess faltered. The man whose hand she clutched, Daniel Moretti. The name that haunted New York in whispers. The man who moved through shadows, whose reach stretched beyond law or mercy. And her fingers clung to his hand as if it was the only lifeline left. She tried to convince herself she could slip away, pretend it hadn't happened. But when the hostess led Ethan to a table near the windows, Grace's pulse pounded so loudly she thought the entire bar could hear. Daniel hadn't let go of her hand. "Breathe," he murmured. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, grounding her. "If you panic, he'll smell it from across the room." Grace froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. Calm, controlled, like a man who knew predators because he was one. Ethan paused mid-step, suspicion flickering on his face. "Smile," Daniel whispered, lips almost grazing her ear. She obeyed instinctively, forcing her mouth upward. Daniel's arm curved around her back, blocking Ethan's view. For the first time in years, Grace felt hidden. Not safe, but hidden. When Ethan finally turned away, Grace sagged with relief. Only then did Daniel release her hand. The warmth lingered long after his touch. Thank you," she whispered. Daniel's eyes lingered, unreadable. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Cooper!" Grace flinched. Marco, her floor manager, stormed toward her, fury in his eyes. "Table 12 has been waiting 15 minutes for their check. What the hell are you doing standing here?" Grace scrambled. She was assisting me." The words rolled out of Daniel, calm and final. Marco froze. His anger collapsed into something else. Fear. "Mr. Moretti," he stammered. "Of course, sir. My apologies." His eyes darted to Grace. "Take all the time you need, Miss Cooper." Miss Cooper. He had never used her name before. Grace's breath caught. Marco backed away like a man who had touched fire and lived by luck alone. She turned to Daniel, whispering, "What just happened?" His faint smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll learn soon enough. For now, get back to work. Pretend nothing has changed." But everything had. The rest of the shift blurred. Every tray felt heavier, every step slower. She kept glancing at the bar, certain his eyes were still on her, certain the weight of him lingered even when she couldn't see him. At midnight, she clocked out. Marco intercepted her, shoving an envelope into her hand. "He left this for you," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. It was heavy, too heavy for paper. Grace gripped it tight, her pulse stumbling. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want to know. But as she stepped into the night, uniform wrinkled, body aching, she knew the truth. The moment she grabbed that stranger's hand, she hadn't just hidden from Ethan. She had stepped into Daniel Moretti's world. And there was no way back. The envelope felt heavier than stone. Grace carried it pressed against her hip as she slipped through the employee exit, the sound of Manhattan spilling around her in restless waves. Midnight air stung her lungs, sharp with exhaust and fried food from a cart down the block. She pulled her thin jacket tighter across her uniform, heels clicking too fast on the pavement. She didn't dare look inside. Not yet. The street was half empty, neon bleeding over puddles and trash bags. Grace walked quickly, every shadow tugging at her nerves. When a man laughed across the street, her shoulders jumped. When a taxi horn blared, her throat tightened. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the sense that something had shifted tonight, that she had touched something she shouldn't have, and now the world could feel it clinging to her. At the bus stop, she sat rigid on the bench, the envelope gripped in both hands. Her mind ran in frantic circles. What if it was money? What if it was something worse? What if he expected her to call? The bus arrived groaning, nearly empty at this hour. She climbed aboard, sliding into a seat near the middle. The hum of the engine should have been soothing, but every vibration felt like a threat. She pressed her forehead to the window, staring at her reflection, the pale face, the uniform still clinging to her, the haunted eyes that didn't look like her own. Emma's face surfaced in her mind. Soft cheeks, a gap between her teeth when she smiled, the way she clutched her stuffed rabbit until its fur wore thin. Grace wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and hold her daughter close. By the time she reached her stop, her body trembled with fatigue. She walked the last blocks quickly, keys gripped between her fingers, ready to stab at shadows. Her apartment building smelled of old paint and someone's curry dinner. She climbed the stairs, heart hammering until she slid the deadbolt and chain into place. Only then did she peel the envelope open. Stacks of bills spilled onto the counter. Neat, crisp, impossible. She stared at the money like it might morph into something else. Something that made sense. She had never held so much cash in her life. Her throat closed. And then, beneath it, a card. Cream stock, heavy, embossed letters, Daniel Moretti, a phone number. The sight of it sent her stomach into freefall. She dropped it onto the counter as if it burned her skin. This wasn't a gift. This was a claim. She stripped off her uniform with shaking hands, tugged an old t-shirt over her head, and collapsed into bed. Emma was still with Mrs. Patel down the hall. Grace had left her there for the overnight shift. She curled around the empty pillow, inhaling the faint scent of her daughter's shampoo, and told herself she'd wake early, pick Emma up, and pretend tonight never happened. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw black eyes staring back at her. Calm, precise, unshakable. 2 days passed, but the weight of the card poisoned her apartment. She shoved it deep into a drawer, but its presence pressed against her chest every time she entered the kitchen. She kept seeing Ethan in every corner of the city. A man leaning against a lamppost, a car idling too long across the street, a shadow moving too slowly on the stairs. Her nerves frayed thinner each hour, her breath shallow. On the third morning, she braided Emma's hair for preschool. Her hands shook so badly she had to redo the plait twice. "Hold still, baby," she whispered, forcing a smile. Emma twisted to look up at her. "Mommy? Why are your hands shaking?" Grace swallowed hard. "Too much coffee." Emma giggled, satisfied, and lifted her rabbit. "Bun Bun says you should drink tea instead." Grace kissed her daughter's head, blinking back tears. For her. Keep going. Just for her. A knock rattled the apartment door. 3 sharp taps. Grace froze. Her blood drained to ice. She pressed Emma's shoulder gently. "Stay here, sweetheart." Every muscle tight, she approached the door, peered through the peephole. Not Ethan. Her breath stuttered. The scarred man from the bar stood in the hallway. Marco Santoro. He was taller than she remembered, shoulders squared, pale eyes gleaming under the fluorescent light. Grace cracked the door but kept the chain in place. "What do you want?" she demanded, though her voice shook. His expression didn't flicker. He held up another envelope. "From Mr. Moretti. For you." She snatched it quickly, slammed the door, pressed her back to the wood. Her pulse thundered. The envelope was thinner than the first. Inside, a handwritten note, the ink bold, slanted. "Miss Miller, dinner tomorrow evening. My driver will collect you and your daughter at 7. No obligations, only conversation. Bring Emma. My sister will care for her while we speak. Daniel Moretti." Grace read it twice, 3 times. Her knees nearly gave out. He wanted Emma there. Her breath tore from her chest. She ripped the note in half, dropped it in the trash. But when she tried to finish braiding Emma's hair, her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. That night, she double-checked the locks, slid the chain into place, drew the curtains tight. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of eyes watching. Near midnight, headlights flared across the blinds. She froze. A silver sedan idled on the street. No headlights, no movement. Her stomach twisted violently. She knew that car. Ethan. Even from this distance, she recognized the silhouette, the slope of his shoulders, the way he leaned too far forward in the seat. Her body trembled. She reached for the phone on the counter, the cheap prepaid cell that barely held a charge. Her fingers hovered over the number Daniel had left. She couldn't. She wouldn't. The engine revved once, low and taunting. Emma stirred in the next room, a soft whimper in her sleep. Grace's chest squeezed until she could hardly breathe. Her hand shook. She typed the number into the keypad. She didn't hit call. Not yet. But the card glowed in her memory, the embossed letters searing themselves into her bones. When she finally dared peek through the blinds again, the sedan was gone. Grace slid to the floor, knees pulled to her chest, whispering to herself, Don't get pulled in. Don't trade one monster for another. But deep down, she already knew. The night she grabbed Daniel Moretti's hand, her life had been rewritten, and no matter how tightly she clung to the illusion of normalcy, she could never go back. The SUV waited at the curb like a beast disguised in polished black metal. Its tinted windows reflected the flicker of the street lamp, but revealed nothing inside. Grace stood frozen at her apartment window, clutching Emma's small hand so tightly that the child whined. "Mommy, you're hurting," Emma whispered. Grace loosened her grip immediately, kneeling so they were eye to eye. Her daughter's wide brown eyes held curiosity, not fear. The innocence stabbed her. Emma tilted her head toward the sleek car below. "Is that a princess car?" Grace forced a smile, though her throat was dry. "Something like that, baby." But nothing about the vehicle said fairy tale. It said power. It said danger. A sharp knock echoed at the door, steady, certain. Grace's heart lurched. She moved slowly, pressing Emma behind her as she peered through the peephole. Marco Santoro stood there, the scarred man from the bar, Moretti's shadow. His pale eyes scanned the hallway, alert and unbothered, as though no lock, no chain, no weapon could ever keep him out. "It's time," he said when she cracked the door. Her instinct screamed to slam it, to stay hidden, to keep Emma wrapped in the fragile cocoon of their small apartment. But the note still burned in her memory. "Bring Emma." And she remembered the silver sedan, Ethan waiting in the dark. She couldn't protect her daughter here, not anymore. Grace nodded stiffly, her lips trembling around the word. "All right." Marco's jaw dipped in the barest nod. He led them downstairs, his steps silent despite his size. Outside, he opened the SUV door with a gesture that was both courteous and commanding. Grace helped Emma climb in. The leather smelled of cedar and smoke, the interior humming faintly with hidden machinery. Emma's awe filled the silence as she ran her hands over the glowing buttons on the armrest, her stuffed rabbit perched proudly on her lap. Grace sat rigid, hands knotted together, every muscle tight. She tried to memorize the route, but the city blurred by too quickly. Neon gave way to dark avenues, then to the quiet stretch of tree-lined roads. Each turn carried them farther from everything familiar. Emma pressed her nose to the glass. "Look, Mommy, fireflies." Grace followed her gaze. Only headlights, only shadows. She forced a laugh anyway. When the SUV slowed, her breath caught. Iron gates loomed ahead, tall and black, their metalwork twisted into curling designs. They opened soundlessly at Marco's signal, swallowing the vehicle whole. The drive curved through manicured gardens glowing faintly with hidden lights. Then the mansion appeared. Emma gasped. "It's a castle." Grace couldn't disagree. Glass and stone rose high against the night, bathed in warm golden light. The structure was modern, sleek, but it loomed like something out of legend. The SUV stopped at the entrance, where a woman waited. Petite, olive-skinned, with dark hair pulled back into a neat twist, she smiled as if they were old friends. "You must be Grace," she said warmly. Her voice carried a lilting accent, gentle yet confident. "And this little one must be Emma. I'm Sophia Moretti, Daniel's sister." Emma half hid behind Grace's leg, rabbit clutched tight. Sophia crouched gracefully, lowering herself to the child's level. "I have a garden room with flowers that glow at night," she said softly, conspiratorial. "And a teddy bear who has been very lonely. Would you like to meet him?" Emma's eyes widened. She looked up at Grace, pleading silently. Grace's chest ached. Every instinct screamed not to let go. But Sophia's smile held nothing sharp, only warmth. And through the glass walls of the hall behind her, Grace glimpsed blossoms faintly lit, glowing like stars trapped in petals. She knelt, kissed Emma's forehead. "I'll be right here. Go on." Emma slipped her hand into Sophia's and skipped away, her laughter echoing down the hall. Grace rose and froze. He was there. Daniel Moretti stood at the far end of the marble hall. The chandelier light caught the silver at his temples, casting sharp shadows over his face. He wore a charcoal suit, every line precise, his posture straight, commanding. He didn't need to speak. His presence bent the air itself, but when his gaze met hers, something softened. "Grace," he said, her name rolling off his tongue as if he had practiced it. "Welcome." Her pulse hammered. "This is too much," she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, movements measured, deliberate. "It's only dinner," he said, "and a chance for you to see me not as a name, but as a man." The dining room was smaller than she expected. Not a grand hall for 20, but an intimate terrace overlooking the glowing gardens. A table set for two weighted with crystal and fine china. Daniel himself poured her water, dismissing the butler with a quiet gesture. The act unsettled her more than the wealth. "You don't seem surprised I came," Grace said, voice breaking the silence. Daniel leaned back, dark eyes steady. "I was never in doubt. Fear makes people unpredictable, but it also makes them curious." She bristled. "You think I came here out of curiosity? I think you're tired of living in someone else's shadow," he replied. His voice was calm, but the words struck like a blow. Grace looked away, blinking hard. He wasn't wrong. They ate slowly, though Grace barely tasted the food. Every question he asked was deliberate. About Emma, about her work, about the things she missed. He listened, truly listened, his focus so absolute it unnerved her. But warmth didn't erase danger. The way he moved, the way his men hovered unseen in the shadows outside, it all screamed of power sharp enough to cut. The door opened suddenly. Marco stepped inside, his posture tighter than usual. He bent to Daniel, voice low but clear enough for Grace to catch. "Spotted near the preschool, same car, same man." Her blood froze. "Ethan," she whispered. Daniel's face hardened, warmth draining until only steel remained. He rose with slow precision, adjusting his cuff. "You won't deal with him again," he said. Grace surged to her feet. "Wait, you can't just, he's Emma's father." Daniel turned sharply, gaze pinning her in place. "A father protects, a father builds. He has done neither. He is nothing but a threat." Her heart twisted. For years she had wrestled with guilt. Maybe Ethan was broken, maybe he would change, maybe she should have endured more. But Daniel's blunt words stripped all excuses bare. Still, fear clung to her. "What are you going to do?" Daniel stepped closer, his presence consuming. "I'll do what men like him fear most. I'll show him he has no power left." The next afternoon, Grace walked Emma home from preschool, her body tense, eyes scanning every corner. Then the silver sedan rolled to the curb. Ethan leaned across the passenger seat, smirk curling his lips. "Grace," he drawled. "Long time no see. You've been busy." Grace's breath stuttered. She gripped Emma's hand tighter. "Leave us alone." His gaze slid to Emma. Cute kid. Shame she doesn't remember her father. Before Grace could react, a black SUV pulled up behind him. Daniel Moretti stepped out. The air thickened. Ethan's smirk faltered. "You're making a habit of being where you don't belong," Daniel said softly, menace woven into every word. "This is my family," Ethan spat. "You lost that word the moment you chose violence over loyalty." Daniel's tone was ice. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Daniel tilted his head. Marco emerged from the SUV, another man beside him. Their presence radiated silent threat. Ethan paled. He slammed the car into gear, speeding away with tires screaming. Grace collapsed against the curb, clutching Emma close, her knees weak. Daniel's eyes lingered on her. He didn't speak, but his vow was clear. For the first time, Ethan had been forced to retreat. And Grace realized the truth. Daniel Moretti was no longer a stranger she had clung to in panic. He was the storm standing between her and destruction. Grace woke before dawn, tangled in sheets that smelled faintly of detergent and exhaustion. For a moment she wasn't sure where she was. The fragments of last night's dream still clung to her. The marble glow of Daniel's mansion, the soft laughter of Emma running through Sophia's garden, the look in Daniel's eyes when he said Ethan would never bother her again. She rolled to her side. The paint on the ceiling was cracked, a faint water stain blooming near the corner. Reality pressed down hard. The apartment was too small, too loud with neighbors, too fragile to hold back the world outside. Beside her, Emma slept, thumb tucked against her cheek, rabbit pressed beneath her chin. Her hair fanned across the pillow in messy strands that smelled of strawberry shampoo. Grace brushed one strand back gently, her chest tightening. If only she could freeze time. Stay here in this bubble. But even in sleep, her daughter twitched restlessly, as if sensing her mother's tension. Grace pressed a kiss to her temple and slipped quietly out of bed. She boiled water for instant coffee, the kettle shrieking too loud in the early silence. Her hands trembled as she poured, liquid spilling across the counter. She cursed softly and grabbed a towel. Her reflection in the kitchen window startled her. The dark circles under her eyes seemed deeper, her face gaunter. She looked older than her 26 years. Older, tireder, but not wiser. Because even after everything, Ethan's shadow still followed her. The memory struck like lightning. The smell of beer, sharp and sour, clinging to his breath. The slam of his fist against the apartment door. Emma's wail splitting the air. "You think you can walk away from me?" His voice, a snarl echoing in the small space. His hand grabbing her arm, bruising her skin. "You think anyone else will want you? A waitress with nothing? A mother with baggage?" She remembered the sting of his slap. The shame of hiding the bruise under cheap makeup. The nights she prayed Emma would sleep through the yelling. Even now, years later, she felt the sting on her skin. Grace gasped, gripping the counter until her knuckles whitened. She pressed her forehead to the cool surface, whispering to herself, "It's over. You got out. He can't hurt you." But he could. He was back. The day passed in fragments. She dressed Emma for preschool, hands clumsy as she braided her daughter's hair. "Mommy, you keep redoing it," Emma complained. "It's fine." Grace forced a smile. "I want it to be perfect." Emma tilted her head. "Are you scared again?" The honesty nearly broke her. Grace kissed her cheek. "Never of you, baby." She walked her daughter to the preschool, scanning every car, every man who lingered too long. Her chest clenched at the sight of a silver sedan parked near the corner. She froze, heart hammering, until a woman climbed out with groceries, humming to herself. Not Ethan. Not today. Still, her pulse didn't settle until she saw Emma vanish inside the building. When she turned back toward the street, he was there. Marco Santoro leaned against a lamppost, scar catching the light. His suit was dark, pressed, his posture relaxed but coiled like a spring. "You don't have to watch me," Grace said quietly as she passed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Moretti asked me to." His tone was flat, neutral, as if the answer required no further explanation. Grace's steps faltered. "I don't want him involved." Marco's pale eyes flicked toward her, sharp and calm. "You involved him the moment you touched his hand." The words pierced deeper than she wanted to admit. She quickened her pace, pretending she hadn't heard. But the truth gnawed at her all day. That night, exhaustion dragged her into a restless sleep. She was back at La Riviera. Ethan's smirk glowed from across the room. Her pulse thundered as she searched for the bar, for the stranger who had shielded her. But the stool was empty. The men in suits were gone. Daniel wasn't there. She spun in circles, panic clawing her throat, until Ethan's shadow swallowed her. Grace jerked awake, gasping, sweat clinging to her skin. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She fumbled for it with shaking hands. One message, no name, only an initial. D. Breathe. Her heart seized. She stared at the screen, breath ragged. How did he know? How could he know she needed that single word at that exact moment? She dropped the phone onto the bed, chest heaving. Fear and something far more dangerous twisted together inside her. The following evening, she carried groceries up the stairwell, bag handles cutting into her palms. The building was quiet, too quiet. Each step echoed sharply against the walls. Halfway up, footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate. Her breath caught. She turned, groceries slipping, apples rolling down the steps. A neighbor rounded the corner with a laundry basket, nodding politely as he passed. Grace sagged against the railing, clutching the banister for balance. She gathered the scattered apples with trembling hands, heart still galloping long after the sound of his steps faded. When she finally made it inside, she bolted the lock and slid to the floor. From the bedroom, Emma's voice called softly, "Mommy, are you okay?" Grace wiped her eyes quickly. "Just tired, sweetheart." But she wasn't tired. She was unraveling. The next night, the knock came. Not Ethan's pounding, not Marco's steady tap. A single knock, quiet, certain. Grace hesitated, chain still fastened, before opening. Daniel Moretti stood in the hallway. The overhead light flickered, but it didn't touch him. His suit was immaculate, his dark eyes steady. He filled the narrow hall with presence alone. Grace's throat tightened. "You can't just show up here." "You saw him again," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Her breath faltered. I don't know. Maybe. I thought, you don't need to think." His voice was soft but sharp enough to cut. "You need to be safe." Grace bristled. "And you get to decide what that means?" He stepped closer, the air tightening with his presence. His gaze pinned her. "I decide what happens to men who threaten you." "Yes." Her heart thudded painfully. Fear warred with anger, and something else she refused to name. Then Emma padded into the hall, rubbing her eyes, hair messy from sleep. "Mommy?" Daniel's gaze softened instantly. He crouched, suit creasing, his posture shifting. "Emma," he said gently, like he'd practiced it 100 times. "Did I wake you?" She shook her head, thumb in her mouth. "Are you Mommy's friend?" Grace froze. The question hung heavy in the air. Daniel smiled faintly. "Something like that." Emma's small hand tugged Grace's. "Can he stay for pancakes?" Grace's throat closed. She couldn't answer. Daniel rose, straightening his jacket. His voice was quiet, certain. "I'll be back tomorrow. Both of you need rest." Then he was gone, footsteps fading down the hall. Grace stood trembling, Emma's warm hand in hers, her mind a storm. Ethan's shadow haunted her. But now another shadow had entered their lives. One darker, one heavier, one impossible to ignore. The shadow of Daniel Moretti. The storm outside had raged through the night, rain lashing against the apartment windows like fists demanding to be let in. By morning the city was washed in gray, puddles swallowing sidewalks, the air damp and heavy. Grace watched it from the window, Emma's small body warm against her hip. She should have been thinking about daycare payments, about the double shift scheduled tonight, about groceries, normal things. But all she could think about was the man who had stood in her hallway 2 nights ago. Daniel Moretti. Her pulse quickened at the memory of his voice, soft yet absolute, cutting through her resistance. At the memory of his eyes when he crouched to speak to Emma, dark as obsidian yet softened for her daughter alone. Grace tightened her hold on Emma, whispering against her hair, "You don't need him, baby. You just need me." But her heart betrayed her with every uneven beat. She dropped Emma at preschool, her steps quick, eyes darting. No silver sedan today, no sign of Ethan. Still she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She turned a corner and froze. The SUV was there. Black, gleaming, parked across the street like a sentinel. The back window lowered just enough. Daniel sat inside, framed by shadow, eyes fixed on her. Her throat dried. People streamed around her, umbrellas bobbing, but for one dizzying moment, the world shrank to only him. Then he raised two fingers, a silent summons. Grace's body refused to move, but Marco appeared from the driver's seat, umbrella in hand, opening the door with precise courtesy. "You'll catch cold, Miss Miller." She almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement, as if the weather was what threatened her. Still, she climbed in. The SUV purred forward, city fading behind. Grace sat stiff, rain streaking across the tinted windows. Daniel watched her with unnerving stillness, every detail of her posture taken in as though catalogued. "You didn't call," he said finally. His tone was calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath. Grace swallowed. "I didn't ask for your help." "You did," Daniel replied smoothly, "when you took my hand." Her cheeks flushed hot. She looked away. That was desperation. His lips curved faintly. "Desperation is honesty, Grace. People reveal who they are when they're desperate." Her chest constricted. She hated that he was right. The SUV carried them north, away from noise, into quiet streets lined with brownstones and old trees dripping rain. Finally, it stopped before a narrow townhouse, far humbler than the mansion. Daniel gestured toward it. "I thought you might prefer somewhere less overwhelming." Grace hesitated. "Why am I here?" "Because hiding doesn't suit you." He stepped out first, offering his hand as if the decision were already made. She ignored the hand, climbing out on her own, but the touch lingered in her mind, the warmth of it, the control woven into every gesture. Inside, the townhouse was warm, filled with books and soft light. It didn't feel like a Mafia boss's home. It felt human. Emma ran straight for the bookshelf, delighted by the row of storybooks stacked neatly on a lower shelf. Grace's throat tightened. He had thought of Emma. Daniel's voice drew her back. "Tea?" She blinked. "You make tea?" A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "I have been known to." They sat at a small table by the window. The rain tapped gently now, softened to a lull. Grace wrapped her hands around the mug, needing the warmth. She refused to look at him, but she felt the weight of his gaze. Finally she whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Daniel leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. His suit shifted with the movement, precise lines still perfect. "Because you've been carrying the weight of fear alone. That ends." Her laugh cracked. "You think you can just erase fear?" His dark eyes didn't waver. "No, but I can make sure it isn't yours to bear alone." The words cut deeper than she expected. Emma's laughter rang from the corner where Sophia, arriving silently as if conjured, had joined her with a box of colored pencils. The sight of her daughter drawing with a woman she'd just met should have terrified Grace. Instead, it filled the room with something warmer, something dangerous. Hope. She turned back to Daniel, and the silence between them shifted. The air grew thick, charged. Grace forced herself to speak. "You scare me." Daniel tilted his head. "Because of what I am. Because of what you make me feel." For the first time, his composure faltered, a flicker in his eyes. Heat, sharp and undeniable. He leaned forward, voice low. "Then maybe it's not fear." Her breath caught. She pushed back from the table, heart hammering. "This is wrong. I shouldn't be here." Daniel stood too, closing the distance effortlessly. His presence swallowed the room. "Wrong doesn't matter to men like Ethan. Wrong doesn't protect you. But I can." Her pulse raced, every instinct screaming to run, yet her body rooted to the floor. His hand lifted, fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, terrifying. Grace whispered, "You're a stranger." His lips curved faintly. "Not for long." Emma's voice broke the moment. "Mommy, look. I drew you." Grace turned, breath ragged, and saw the crayon portrait. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun. One was Grace, one was Emma, and the third, dark suit, sharp shoulders, was unmistakable. Her throat closed. She crouched, kissing her daughter's cheek. "It's beautiful, baby." When she looked back, Daniel's eyes lingered on the drawing, unreadable. Then they lifted to hers. We'll talk again soon, he said. Not a question, a promise. That night, back in her apartment, Grace lay awake long after Emma had drifted off. The rabbit was tucked under her daughter's chin, crayons scattered across the table. She stared at the stick figure with sharp shoulders and realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of Daniel Moretti anymore, not enough, and that was more dangerous than anything Ethan could do. The city seemed quieter that morning, but Grace had learned silence was no comfort. Silence meant something waited in the shadows. She held Emma's hand tight as they walked the 2 blocks to preschool. The girl skipped happily, oblivious to the way her mother's gaze darted from every parked car to every stranger's face. At the corner, Grace froze. A silver sedan, idling, headlights off. Her stomach twisted into knots. She tugged Emma across the street quickly, almost too quickly. "Come on, baby. We're late," Emma pouted. "But we're not." Grace bent low, forcing a smile. "Race me then." Emma squealed and ran ahead, braids bouncing, the stuffed rabbit's ear dragging from her backpack. Grace's heart clenched at the sight. She had to keep Emma safe, at any cost. When Emma disappeared into the preschool doors, Grace lingered, chest tight. The sedan was still there. The driver's window slid down, and Ethan leaned across the seat, smirk cutting sharp against his lean face. "Grace?" His voice slithered over her name. "Been a while." Her blood ran cold. She forced her feet not to move, not to run. Running meant giving him power. "What do you want?" she managed, voice flat. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the building behind her. "Cute kid. Looks just like you." Grace's stomach churned. Her nails dug crescents into her palms. "Stay away from her." He chuckled, low and venomous. "Relax. I'm not here for playdates. I just came to warn you." Her throat tightened. "Warn me?" He leaned closer, eyes gleaming with something darker than arrogance. "You think hiding behind Moretti makes you untouchable? You think his shadow keeps you safe? Grace, he's finished. Men are circling him like vultures. And when he falls, anyone near him falls too." Grace's breath hitched. "You're lying." "Am I?" Ethan's smirk widened. "Ask yourself why he's suddenly so interested in you. He doesn't protect. He collects. And when the knives come out, you'll be the first piece he tosses aside." Her hands shook. "You don't know him. I know enough. Moretti bleeds like any man. And when his blood spills, yours will too." Grace turned sharply, retreating before her voice cracked. She forced herself to keep her pace steady, not giving him the satisfaction of her fear. But her vision blurred, her ears buzzed, and every step home felt like dragging chains. The apartment offered no comfort. The walls felt thin, the locks flimsy. She sank to the floor, back pressed against the door, Ethan's words replaying on a cruel loop. When he falls, anyone near him falls too. She squeezed her eyes shut. She wanted to believe Daniel's promise, that she and Emma were safe under his watch. But promises didn't stop bullets. The phone on her counter buzzed, her stomach flipped. Slowly, she picked it up. A single message lit the screen. "D. Did he approach you?" Her breath stalled. He knew again. He always knew. Hands trembling, she typed, "Yes, at the preschool. He warned me about you." The reply came instantly. "D. Good. Then he knows he is being watched. He will not come close again." She pressed a hand over her eyes, tears burning. Watched. Every word confirmed the world she had stumbled into was larger, darker than she wanted to believe. That evening, the SUV appeared at her curb. Grace hesitated, staring from her window as rain streaked the glass. Part of her wanted to bolt the door and pretend she never saw it, but Emma tugged her hand eagerly. "Are we going to see the glowing flowers again?" Grace's chest ached. She nodded weakly. "Yes, baby." Marco opened the door with his usual calm efficiency. The ride was silent, but Grace felt Daniel's absence before she saw it. His seat was empty. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. Marco's gaze didn't shift from the road. "Working." Something in the way he said it made her shiver. At the mansion, Sophia swept Emma away into the garden with stories of new blossoms. Grace lingered in the library, fire crackling, shadows long across the shelves. The door opened at last. Daniel entered, his presence filling the room instantly. His jacket was off, his sleeves rolled, his tie loosened just slightly. He looked less like the untouchable figure she'd met at the bar, and more like a man carrying the weight of a war. "You saw him?" It wasn't a question. Grace's throat closed. "At the preschool." Daniel's jaw clenched. He crossed to the decanter, poured a drink, and downed it in one motion. "He's aligning with my enemies," Daniel said flatly. "He thinks using you will give him leverage." Grace's breath faltered. "He said when you fall, I'll fall too." Daniel turned sharply, eyes locking on hers. "I don't fall." The words landed like a blow, sharp, absolute. But the shadow in his gaze told her even he couldn't banish doubt completely. Grace whispered, "What if he's right? What if Emma—" In a flash, Daniel was in front of her, his hands braced against the chair where she sat. His face was inches from hers, his voice a low growl. "Nothing touches your daughter. Nothing touches you. I will burn this city to the ground before I let that happen." Her pulse raced, terror and heat tangling until she couldn't breathe. Daniel's gaze dropped to her lips, just for a second. Then he pushed back, straightening, voice steady again. "Trust me, Grace. Fear belongs to him, not you." Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep in Sophia's arms, Grace wandered the garden alone. The glowing flowers shimmered softly, their light fragile against the dark. Her fingers brushed the locket Daniel had given her, the silver warm against her skin. She should have thrown it away. She should have run. Instead, she whispered into the night, "Why do I believe you?" Behind her, she felt him watching, and for once, she didn't turn away. The storm passed, but the city didn't feel lighter. Morning sunlight spilled across the streets in fractured pieces, bouncing off wet pavement and glass towers. Grace stood at her window, Emma's soft breathing behind her, and felt only the weight of inevitability pressing closer. She had wanted to believe Ethan's words were nothing but empty venom. But the way Daniel's jaw had tightened, the way Marco lingered outside every doorway, it told her there were truths buried under the threats, and truths were always more dangerous than lies. The SUV arrived again, as inevitable as the sunrise. Grace hesitated at the door, Emma's backpack slung over her shoulder. "Do we have to?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone. Emma beamed, already tugging her hand. "The glowing flowers, Mommy," and Sophia promised cookies. Her daughter's laughter was a lifeline Grace couldn't deny. She locked the door, slid the chain into place, and followed the routine she was beginning to dread and crave. Marco nodded as always, silent sentinel. His scar caught the light as he opened the door. Grace climbed in, her pulse stumbling when she saw Daniel inside. He didn't speak at first. He watched. His gaze traveled over her face, pausing on the faint shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Finally he said softly, "You didn't sleep." Grace bristled. "You send men to watch my building, and now you track my sleep too?" Daniel's lips curved faintly, but his eyes stayed dark. "I don't need to track. You wear your exhaustion like a wound." Her throat tightened. She turned toward the window, refusing to let him see the truth in her silence. At the mansion, Sophia welcomed Emma with open arms, leading her straight to the kitchen where sweet scents already filled the air. Grace lingered in the entry, clutching her jacket, until Daniel gestured her toward the library. The fire was already lit, shadows dancing across the shelves. He poured 2 glasses of wine, though it was barely noon. "I don't drink in the morning," Grace said quickly, folding her arms. Daniel handed her the glass anyway. "Today isn't morning. Today is war." Her pulse skipped. She didn't touch the glass. "Why do you say things like that?" "Because they're true," he replied simply, settling into the chair across from hers. The silence stretched. Grace shifted, unsettled by his stillness. She wanted him to move, to fidget, to do anything human. But Daniel Moretti sat like carved stone, only his eyes alive, burning into her. Finally she blurted, "Why me?" His brow lifted slightly. "Why not you?" "Because you don't know me. Because I'm just—" She broke off, voice cracking. "I'm just a waitress trying to keep a roof over my daughter's head." Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, gaze unflinching. "And you think that makes you less?" Her throat closed. He continued, voice low and deliberate. "You work until your body breaks, and still you walk home to your child with a smile. You endured a man who tried to crush you and came out still standing. Grace, there is more strength in you than in half the men I command." Her chest ached. She wanted to argue, but no words came. Daniel's voice softened. "That is why you. Because you remind me what matters." The air between them grew heavy, intimate, unbearable. The door opened suddenly. Marco stepped inside, eyes flicking briefly to Grace before settling on Daniel. "It's confirmed," Marco said. "Ethan met with the Marcelli crew last night." Daniel's jaw hardened, though his voice stayed calm. "They think he can give them access." Marco nodded once. "He promised her." Grace's heart lurched. "Me? He told them about me?" Daniel turned sharply, gaze burning into hers. "He will use anything he can touch, but he will not touch you again." Grace's stomach twisted. "You say that like it's that simple." Daniel stood, adjusting his cuff with deliberate precision. "It is. For me." Then he was gone, following Marco out the door, leaving the scent of smoke and iron behind. Hours passed. Grace sat in the library, staring at the fire until her vision blurred. Every crackle sounded like footsteps. Every shadow on the wall stretched too long. When Daniel finally returned, the sun had set. His jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled, the silver at his temples catching the dim light. His posture was rigid, but something in his face was different, lines deeper, wear heavier. Grace rose without thinking. "What happened?" He didn't answer. He poured a drink, downed it, then braced his hands against the mantel, shoulders tense. Grace approached slowly, heart racing. "Daniel?" For a moment he didn't move. Then his voice came, rougher than she had ever heard. "I've spent my life controlling every piece of this city. Every move, every whisper, every betrayal. But control doesn't last. Not forever." Her breath caught. He had never spoken like this before, never allowed cracks to show. He turned his head slightly, eyes dark and tired. "And now you're here. You and your daughter. And I find myself wanting control for the first time in years, not for power, for peace." Grace's chest ached. She whispered, "You don't have to do this alone." His gaze locked on hers, sharp, searching. Then, slowly, his hand reached out, fingers brushing hers. The touch was light, hesitant, not the commanding grip she had felt at the bar, not the calculated possession. It was fragile, almost uncertain. Her breath trembled. She didn't pull away. For one suspended moment, the world narrowed to that single touch. Fear and desire blurred until she could no longer separate them. Then Emma's laughter rang from the hall, shattering the spell. Daniel's hand withdrew instantly, his composure sliding back into place. "Go to her," he said softly, almost regretfully. Grace lingered, heart hammering, before turning away. But as she scooped Emma into her arms, Grace knew the truth. She was already tethered to him. And no warning, no shadow, no threat could sever the fragile alliance forming between them. The city never slept, but some nights felt different. That night, Grace swore the hum of traffic outside her window carried a darker rhythm, like whispers she wasn't supposed to hear. She pressed Emma closer as her daughter stirred in her sleep. The rabbit was clutched tight under the child's chin, one ear ragged from years of comfort. Grace smoothed the hair from Emma's forehead, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone heard anymore. She wanted to believe Daniel's words, that nothing would touch them, that his shadow was enough to shield them. But shadows cut both ways. They hid, but they also suffocated, and Ethan's warning echoed louder each day. When he falls, you fall too. The next morning, the SUV wasn't at the curb. For the first time in weeks, Marco wasn't waiting by the lamppost. The absence should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like the floor had been ripped away. Grace walked Emma to preschool with her nerves screaming. Every passing car made her flinch. Every stranger's face looked like a mask hiding intent. Halfway back to the apartment, she noticed it. A man leaning against a corner store wall. Another one across the street pretending to scroll through his phone. Both with sharp suits, shoulders squared, movements too controlled. Not Daniel's men. Her breath quickened. She forced herself to keep walking, but every instinct screamed she was being herded, observed, measured. By the time she reached her building, a folded note was taped to her door. Her hands shook as she tore it down. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. He can't protect you forever. You'll be safer if you come to me. Tonight, 9 p.m. Same corner where we first met. Grace crumpled it in her fist, bile rising in her throat. He had been here, at her door. She wanted to call Daniel immediately, to let his calm, dangerous voice ground her. But another thought stopped her cold. What if Ethan was right? What if staying near Moretti only painted a target on Emma's back? She sank to the floor, forehead against the wood, tears burning her eyes. That night she couldn't sit still. She paced the apartment, Emma asleep in the next room. She should have stayed put, locked the door, trusted Daniel's men would return, but the note burned like acid in her pocket. At 8:45, she slipped out. The streets were slick with mist, neon lights fractured in puddles. Grace pulled her jacket tighter, head down. Every step toward the corner felt like betrayal, and yet she couldn't stop. When she arrived, Ethan was already there. Leaner than before, sharper, his smile all venom. "Grace," he drawled, spreading his arms like a savior. "I knew you'd come." Her chest tightened. "Say what you need to say." He stepped closer. Too close. "Moretti's a dead man walking. The Marcellis have already cut deals. His empire is crumbling, and when it falls, so will anyone under his name. You think he'll choose you and your kid over survival? Don't be naive." Grace's voice trembled. "You don't know him." "Oh, I know him better than you ever will. And I know men like him don't love. They own. He's already claimed you, hasn't he? One touch, one look, and suddenly you're his. That's what he does. And when the knives come, he'll throw you to them without blinking." Grace's hand shook, but she lifted her chin. "I'd still rather face the knives with him than crawl back to you." For the first time, Ethan's smirk faltered. His eyes flashed with rage. "You'll regret that." He turned sharply, disappearing into the night, leaving the stench of smoke and fury behind. Grace stumbled home, pulse racing. She had barely locked the door when the phone Daniel had given her buzzed. "D. You left." "Why?" Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, typing with trembling hands. He left a note. "I had to know." The reply came instantly. "D. Never again. If you need answers, you come to me, not to him. Do you understand?" Tears blurred her vision. "Yes." Another message followed, final and cold. "D. Good, because the net is tightening, and the next time you see him, it won't be words he brings." Grace pressed the phone to her chest, her body trembling. She had thought she knew fear before, but this was different. This was war. The first thing Grace noticed that night was the silence. Not the ordinary quiet of her neighborhood, no babies crying, no televisions humming through thin walls, no drunken laughter from the alley, but an unnatural, heavy silence, the kind that pressed down on the chest until breathing became effort. She sat at the edge of Emma's bed, stroking her daughter's hair as the girl clutched her rabbit, lashes fluttering in dreams. Grace should have been reassured by the peace in her child's face. Instead, her heart pounded harder. Something was wrong. For weeks now, she had grown used to the faint presence of Daniel's men outside. She had learned to measure her safety by the hum of the SUV engine at the curb, by Marco's still silhouette under the lamppost. Their watchful shadows had become part of her nights. Tonight, there was nothing. The absence was louder than gunfire. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Emma, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The tiles were cold under her feet, her reflection ghost-like in the dark window. She poured herself water she didn't want, only to give her trembling hands something to hold. Every creak of the building made her flinch. Pipes groaned. The radiator hissed. Her breath echoed back at her. She checked the phone Daniel had given her, still dark. No breathe, no safe. She almost laughed at herself. When had she started waiting for his messages, like a child waits for prayers to be answered? Her throat tightened. Then, headlights flared through the blinds. She hurried to the window, heart lurching. Relief poured through her when she saw it. The SUV, black and solid, Marco's figure at the wheel, posture erect. She sagged against the glass, whispering, "Thank God." But her relief shattered instantly. 3 sedans rolled in behind. Dark, unmarked, too deliberate. They stopped in formation, headlights slicing across the street before cutting off in eerie unison. Doors opened. Men emerged, 6, maybe 8, suits crisp, steps heavy, eyes sharp. Not Daniel's men. Grace's blood turned to ice. She ran to Emma's room, scooping her daughter and Rabbit into her arms. Emma whimpered, half asleep. "Mommy?" "Shh, baby. Hold on to me. Just hold on." The first crash echoed through the building. The downstairs door splintered. Shouts erupted. Boots thundered against the stairs. Grace grabbed the phone with shaking fingers. "They're here," she whispered. The reply came instantly, like he had been waiting. "D, chain the door. Do not move." Her hands fumbled but found the chain. She slid it into place and pressed her back to the wood, heart hammering so hard she thought Emma would feel it through her chest. The stairwell roared. Voices barked orders in Italian and English. The thud of boots grew louder. Then, impact. The door shook violently. The chain strained. Emma whimpered. Grace kissed her hair, whispering broken promises. "It's okay. Mommy's here. It's okay." Another crash. The wood cracked. The chain snapped. The door flew open. A man filled the frame, broad shoulders, a scar cutting across his jaw. Gun raised, smirk sharp. "Well, well," he sneered. "Boss wants a word." Grace staggered back, clutching Emma. "Stay away from her." The man's smirk widened. He lifted the weapon. A single gunshot cracked the air. The man crumpled instantly, blood spilling across the floor. Grace gasped, knees buckling. Daniel Moretti stood in the doorway, gun steady, eyes black as obsidian, presence so powerful it felt like the air bent around him. Behind him, Marco and 2 others surged forward, guns blazing. The hallway exploded in chaos. Shouts, ricochets, bodies hitting walls. Smoke filled the air, sharp with the metallic tang of blood. Daniel didn't flinch. He stepped fully into the room, gaze locking on Grace. His voice was calm, absolute. "Take her, now." Marco grabbed Grace's arm, dragging her toward the rear exit. She stumbled, Emma sobbing into her chest, Rabbit crushed tight. Grace looked back desperately. Daniel fired again, unblinking, precise. His movements weren't frantic. They were orchestrated. Every shot a command, every step a verdict. Grace had seen violence before, in Ethan's fists, in the cruelty of men who loved control. But this was something else entirely. This was violence wielded like a shield, and it terrified her, because part of her trusted it. The alley outside was pandemonium. Gunfire ricocheted off brick walls. Headlights swung wildly. Shouts cut through smoke. Marco shoved Grace and Emma into the SUV, slamming the door. "Down!" he barked. Grace dropped instantly, curling around her daughter, shielding her with her body. Emma's sobs broke her heart. "It's okay, baby," Grace whispered frantically. "Mommy's got you." The SUV lurched forward, tires screeching across wet asphalt. Through the rear window, Grace caught glimpses of Daniel. He moved like a phantom through the chaos, broad shoulders cutting through smoke, gunfire lighting the night around him. Her throat closed. He was terrifying. He was salvation. She didn't know which truth scared her more. The chase didn't end there. One of the sedans roared to life, headlights blazing, tires screaming as it swerved behind the SUV. Emma screamed at the sound. Marco's voice was sharp. "Hold on!" The SUV veered hard, throwing Grace against the seat. Bullets pinged against the rear panel, sparks flying. Grace clutched Emma tighter, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. The SUV swerved again, tires splashing through puddles, until finally the mansion gates loomed ahead. They slid open and the SUV roared through. The sedan braked hard at the edge, unwilling to cross that line. Grace sagged, trembling so violently she thought her bones might crack. Sophia was waiting the moment the SUV screeched to a stop. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Emma, pale and sobbing. She gathered the girl into her arms, rocking her gently, murmuring words in Italian like a lullaby. Emma clung to her instantly. Grace stumbled inside the marble hall, knees buckling. She collapsed onto the cold floor, chest heaving. Her body shook with every breath. The scent of gunpowder clung to her hair, her skin. Minutes stretched. Every tick of the clock hammered louder. Then the doors opened again. Daniel entered. His shirt was torn, collar dark with soot. His knuckles were raw, a cut streaked his cheek. Blood stained his sleeve. She didn't know if it was his. His posture was iron, but his eyes, God, his eyes burned with something darker than rage. Grace staggered to her feet. What was that? Who were they? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Marcelli men. Sent to take you. To use you. Her stomach twisted. And Ethan? Daniel's jaw clenched. He was with them. He's chosen his side. The words shattered her. Ethan, the father of her child. Once her world, now her ruin. She pressed a hand over her mouth, choking back a sob. Why me? Why is it always me? Daniel stepped closer, slow, steady, every line of him radiating control. His voice dropped low, steady as a vow. Because you're the only thing he can touch that matters to me. Her heart stuttered. She shook her head violently. Don't say that. It's the truth. Tears blurred her vision. And when your war ends, what happens to us? For the first time, Daniel's gaze softened. The armor slipped, if only for a heartbeat. Then, he said quietly, there will be no shadows left. Only peace. And I'll make sure you see it. Grace trembled, fists clenched. She wanted to believe him. God help her, she wanted to. But Emma's sobs still echoed from the next room, and the scent of blood still clung to the air. Peace was a dream, and dreams had a way of breaking. The sky was the color of steel the morning Daniel disappeared into war. Grace knew because he hadn't slept. He had paced the library all night, his voice low and sharp on the phone. Papers and maps spread across the desk like battle scars. When dawn came, he only said 3 words. Tomorrow it ends. And then he was gone. The hours that followed were torture. Grace paced the marble floors of the mansion until her steps wore grooves into the silence. Every creak of the old house sounded like a warning. Sophia brought her tea, spoke in a soothing voice, but nothing pierced the weight that hung in the air. Upstairs, Emma played with her stuffed rabbit, blissfully unaware that her mother's world was hanging by a thread. When the phone buzzed in her hand, Grace nearly dropped it from the jolt. One message, short and merciless. D. Stay inside. Do not leave Sophia's sight. Her stomach clenched. He was already in it. Across the city, inside a cavernous Brooklyn warehouse, Daniel faced the Marcellis. The place stank of rust and oil. Armed men lined the catwalks above, rifles catching the fractured light through broken windows. And in the center stood Ethan. Thinner, harder, but still carrying that same venomous smirk. Well, Ethan sneered, pushing off a crate. The mighty Moretti finally crawls to me. I told Grace you'd fall. Should have listened to me. Daniel's expression didn't flicker. His voice was calm, each word edged like a blade. You sold your daughter's safety for a seat at another man's table. That isn't victory, Ethan. That's weakness. The smirk faltered, but Ethan pushed it back on. She was mine. Always mine. You think she loves you? No, she fears you. Just like the rest of them. Daniel's eyes burned black as obsidian. She has more courage in her little finger than you've shown in your entire life. The Marcelli boss stepped forward, gray-haired, snake-eyed, his voice a hiss. Enough talk. You brought your men, I brought mine. Let's finish this. The silence cracked. Gunfire erupted. Back at the mansion, Grace jolted as if the bullets had rattled her own walls. She pressed Emma tight against her chest as Sophia closed the curtains. But sound seemed to bleed through the glass anyway. Distant thunder, imagined screams. Grace kissed her daughter's hair, tears in her eyes. It's just thunder, baby. Just thunder. But she didn't believe her own lie. Inside the warehouse, chaos reigned. Bullets tore through crates, men screamed, blood splashed across concrete. Marco moved like a shadow at Daniel's side, precise and merciless. Daniel pressed forward, every step a verdict, every shot deliberate. His eyes never left Ethan. Ethan stumbled back, firing wildly, his arrogance unraveling into panic. "You can't kill me, Moretti!" he shouted, tripping over debris. "If you kill me, she'll hate you forever!" Daniel advanced steadily, gun unwavering. "Grace already chose," he said, voice low, final. Ethan's bravado shattered. The shot rang out. Not Daniel's. Marco's. Ethan fell, eyes wide in disbelief, his smirk erased forever. The Marcellis broke like glass. One by one their men fled, leaving the warehouse silent but for the drip of blood and the echo of defeat. Daniel lowered his gun slowly. For the first time, his hand trembled. Hours later, the mansion doors burst open. Grace ran down the hall, heart in her throat. When she saw him, her legs nearly gave out. Daniel, alive, bloodied, torn, exhausted, but alive. She collided with his chest, arms locking around his neck, sobbing into his skin. I thought I lost you." He crushed her against him, his arms iron, his voice low and raw. "You'll never lose me. Not while I breathe. Not you. Not Emma." She pulled back, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes blazing. "Protection isn't enough, Daniel. I don't just want safety. I want you." The world stilled. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her tears. His voice cracked open, softer than she had ever heard. "You already have me. From the first moment, you had everything." And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was fire, fierce, desperate, consuming. The taste of smoke and blood, the rawness of a man who had held back too long. Grace melted against him, her body trembling, her heart surrendering. For the first time, she didn't fear the storm. She belonged in it. When they broke apart, breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. His words were a vow. "I love you, Grace. I love you. And I love Emma. And I swear, you'll never walk in the dark again." Her lips trembled into a smile. "I love you too, Daniel Moretti. And that terrifies me more than anything." A rough laugh escaped him, broken, disbelieving. "Then don't be afraid anymore. From now on, there are no shadows." Days later, the garden glowed golden under the late afternoon sun. Emma chased butterflies across the grass, her laughter ringing like bells. Grace sat on the stone bench, sapphire glinting faintly on her finger. Daniel came to her side quietly, his presence settling her heart without a word. For a while they watched Emma, their silence a fragile peace. "She deserves more than this world gave her," Daniel murmured. Grace looked at him, her throat tight. "So do you." He turned, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "I want more. A life. Not alone. Never alone. With you. With her." Before she could speak, he sank to one knee. A velvet box opened in his hand, revealing a sapphire deep as the sea, set in platinum. "My grandmother's," he said quietly. "She told me to give it only to a woman of true strength. Grace Miller, will you marry me?" Her tears spilled hot, laughter breaking through them. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice steady, joyful. Yes, Daniel. Always. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her up into his arms. The kiss they shared was different this time. Tender, full of promise, the kind of kiss that builds futures. Emma clapped her hands, squealing with delight. "Mommy's a princess!" Grace gathered her daughter close, Daniel's arms strong around them both. For the first time, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. No more running. No more fear. No more shadows. Only love. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That's how I'll know you truly liked it. Even if you're watching on your TV, grab a second to join this family of fans who love emotional and heartfelt stories. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you even more tales like this one.